there are some provision but not provisions under MFRS 137. Okay, some item is also called provision. For example, provision for depreciation, provision for doubtful debts. Last time when I was a student, they still use this term for depreciation, but now we have been using accumulated depreciation, and now we have been using allowance for trade receivable, allowance for impairment of trade receivable. Okay, we don't use this word for provision for depreciation and provision for doubtful debt, but some other country might still be using this term. So this term is not covered under MFRS 137 because this provision for depreciation and provision for doubtful debt is not liability. Okay, so when do you recognize it as a provision? How do you identify whether this transaction is considered as provision or is it a contingent liability? Alright, so provision are recognized when the following conditions are met. Okay, an enterprise has a present obligation as a result of past event. Okay, if you look at the word present obligation di sini, dia ada dua ya. One is legal or constructive. I will explain this one. Okay, when we talk about obligation, it's about you are responsible to fulfill. Okay, you are liable to fulfill, and that obligation, tanggungjawab tu, is either legally or constructive. Okay, dia sama ada salah satu lah. Okay, alright, and then we want to talk about outflow of resources. In order for that transaction to be recognized as a provision and accounted in financial statement, the outflow of resources must be probable. Okay, probable. So probable is indicated by the chance of paying the obligation, the commitment, is more than 50%. Okay, 60%, 70%, 80% of chances of the company to pay for those obligations, then it will be considered as provision. If it is less than 50%, then it means that it is not probable. So if it is not probable, then it cannot be recognized as a provision, and the amount must be reliably estimated. Okay, so in order to be recognized as provision, it must fulfill these two. Of course, present obligation is the definition of the liability itself, but to be recognized as a provision, it must fulfill this, that the outflow is probable and the amount can be reliably estimated. If it does not fulfill any of this, then it cannot be recognized as provision. So when it cannot be recognized as a provision, you have to decide, should it be under contingent liability? Okay, and I'll explain later. Okay, now go back to the present obligation just now. This obligation can either due to legal or constructive. Okay, when it is a legal obligation, it is very clear that it is required by law, or it is required by contract. You have made a contract agreement with your customer. That means you are legally bound to fulfill your obligation. Okay, you pun dah belajar contract revenue. Okay, the agreement have stated your obligation. Okay, and then, or maybe suddenly the government introduce a new law in which you have to comply with. Normally it relates, for example, on environmental, where you need to install certain filter in order to avoid any pollution. So that is considered as obligation due by law. Or it can be constructive. Maybe there is no contract, there is no agreement, there is no law saying that you have that obligation, but the company have made a constructive obligation. What is a constructive obligation? It could be due to your previous practice. Previously, if that similar nature event happened and your company will incur the cost, so the public will assume that you would do the same, okay, which is to incur the cost. or you have made a statement, probably in press conference. You mentioned that, okay, that the company is environmentally responsible. So if there is anything happen, that is waste, okay, release in the river, so the public will expect that your company will incur costs to clean the river. Okay, or it can be any published statement in your website or in your annual report. So that is considered as constructive. So either one, if whether there is a legal obligation or if there is constructive obligation, then you are considered as having a present obligation. Okay, present obligation is either legal or constructive. Okay, what happens if there is no legal obligation, there is no law stating that you have to do it, or there is no contract saying that you are committed to it, and you did not make any statement, you have never came across the same nature of event that require you to incur the cost, then that will be considered as not having present obligation. So when you don't have present obligation, then it means that you have no liability. Okay, alright. Now, this is what I have explained. What is the impact to your financial statement? Because when you recognize a provision, okay, when I explained on the income smoothing just now, the impact when you disclose it, when you account it as a provision, the expenses will increase. Okay, for example, just now, warranty repairs. Okay, so the journal entry would be debit warranty repairs expenses, credit provision for warranty. So debit warranty repair is a debit expenses, so your expenses increase, and when you credit provision, that means your liability increase. So when expenses increase, the profit will be lower and liability will increase, and your debts ratio will also increase. So this is the impact. That's why company that do not want to show high profit, there is a tendency for them to consider any sort of liability as a provision. Okay, so that cannot be done. If it does not comply with this condition, then it cannot be recognized as a provision. It shall not be accounted in your SOPL and SOP. Okay, so how do you measure the provision? Because there is an outflow of resources, and the chances, okay, there is a probable outflow. And how you estimate the amount of the provision? So of course it is up to the best estimate based on the management rational amount, okay, based on the risk and the uncertainty, present value, future event. So you need to consider several factors. Okay, so for example, this is a legal obligation to differentiate between legal and constructive, to indicate that there is a present obligation. Okay, in November 2014, an employee of Ramesh was injured while carrying on official duties. He has filed a claim for damages from the company to the amount of 1 million. Legal advice was sought by the company. So the worker summoned, okay, and sued the company 1 million. So legal advice was sought by the company. So there is a 60% chance company will be held liable for 500,000. So 60% chance means it is more than 50% chances of the need to pay for the obligation. So this is considered as probable to pay 500,000. There is a 40% chance that the company will pay 1 million. So what is the obligating past event? The obligating past event is the past event is when the employee filed claim for damages. Okay, the employee claim for damages, then ada past event. What is the present obligation? The legal obligation. Okay, when you are being sued through court, using law, the employee sue you. Okay, is there any probable outflow? Because the condition to recognize as a provision is there is a probable more than 50%. Yes. Okay, because it's stated there 60%. So the amount is 500,000. That's the amount of the provision. So kat sini dia tunjukkan example. Okay, the journal entry will be debit expenses considered as operating expenses, or you can simply write debit damages expenses. That is much easier. Okay, debit damages expenses and credit provision for damages, and the amount is 500,000. Okay, this is an example of constructive obligation. Asy Berhad operate one of its factories in a foreign country where no environmental law exists. So there is no law. The company no law on environmental. So the company, however, claims to be a socially and environmental responsible. So the company claim to be. So they have made an expectation to the public that they are socially and environmentally responsible. So when the factory operation have seriously hurt the river ecosystem during the current year 2014, of course the public will assume and expect that the company will overcome those problems. So the probable clean up cost. So this is the cost that you need, the company need to incur to clean the river. Okay, so the cost is 1.5 million and it is probable. So you can recognize it as a provision because there is a constructive obligation, there is a present obligation due to constructive obligation, and that there is a past event, and that the amount is probable, and 1.5 million is can be reliably estimated. So damage done to the river ecosystem is the past event. The present obligation is constructive obligation. Okay, probable is more than 50% because maybe the question does not tell you the percentage, but because it states there is a probable, then it is probable lah. Then the amount is reliably estimated. So the journal entry will be debit operating expenses, credit provision for clean up costs. You can simply put as debit clean up costs. Much easier, you just use the same word here. Debit clean up costs and credit provision for clean up costs. Operating expenses is basically the category of the expenses in your SOPL. Okay, you put it under the operating expenses. Okay, so I stop here.